Set us up. What we got?
Okay, so obviously the fall is looming, and we know there's some inevitable things kind of coming at us because of this global pandemic and changes to our society and our world. And one of the things that came up a couple of weeks ago, I had a workshop with AJ Giuliani, works with universal design learning, a lot of project-based learning, right? So his big push, the big takeaway of that workshop, the Zoom that we had done, was this idea that virtually, digitally, right, you can still impact kids, get a lot out of them if you kind of think about instruction in a couple of ways. And I remember sitting there in the Zoom, obviously you not being a part of it, but like stopping whatever you were doing, turning my iPad to you and showing you one of his slides. And one of the things that he did that I thought was pretty validating, and I guess I just hadn't put the pieces together at that time, was he said, you know, what we did from March to June was not online learning. It was an emergency plan to just kind of like put some pieces together. We were in like emergency mode, right? So
100%.
with that, my question is, come fall, we're not treading water anymore, right? If we are 100% online, teaching virtually, what needs to be different? What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing? So I kind of open that up to you.
Yeah, I think that was really a great way to like frame what we did in that time, because you're right, it's not, you know, I don't think anybody would say that we put together a online learning thing. What we did was take a short amount of time, hit the Mayday button and like figure something out and go like, okay, we won't be here Monday. What do we need to do?
This will work for now.
This will work for now, and that for now just kept getting extended. Right, we all jumped into this thinking we probably would come back and end the school year, so that what's going to work for now just kept getting expanded and expanded.
Right.
With this, if we go back in the fall and we're not in school, and I think we should caution saying like online learning environment. I don't think it will be an online learning environment for all people, for like all districts.
Sure.
It will be an away from school learning setup.
Sure.
And each district's gonna have to figure that out on their own. But you know, what is it? What we're now creating a learning, like an actual substitute for being in school, instead of a stopgap where we had the school year from, you know, August, September to March, and then we're just trying to get to the end of the year. We're now starting a year where quite possibly this could be the whole year. Could be part of the year.
Right. A lot of uncertainty. So how do we start that? How do we set it up?
It changes. Like, I think the mentality, first of all, has to change. I think a lot of people's mentality was, what's going to be good enough?
Sure.
Right? What's going to be good enough to get me to whatever point this stops?
Right.
It's now going to have to be, I need to create good classroom environments and lessons and projects and assignments and assessments for an environment that is not in a classroom.
Right.
So it's, instead of saying is this good enough to get me through, it's the same mentality you would approach a school year. Like, it's just the setting has changed. You're not in a classroom.
I think one thing, you're talking about questions, right? So I think one of the questions that should come up, because we know we have a lot of, we're calling it distance learning, right? There's a lot of distance between your computer and your kids, right? So I think we have to think about pace. I think we have to think about timing and that question of what's essential. What are the things that have longevity? What are the things that have endurance, so that the kids are taking things from content area to content area, or taking things from year to year. When we were, like you said, thinking about what's good enough, now we're kind of asking the question, what's necessary? What are the things to get the most bang for our buck instructionally?
Right, and it's kind of like you have to almost like, what did I see? On Twitter you see all kinds of crazy stuff, but like how can we Marie Kondo, what is
I love
that?
that.
Right? How do you do that, like, what's important brings me happiness idea to like curriculum? Because right now I think, we did that like almost too early to look at stuff for the fall, like right when the school year ended, where I think burnout was a little bit higher, and everybody was just like, well, we'll just, whatever it is, we'll just shoehorn what we do into the days we have, whatever the setup is. And I think that's gonna be a recipe for disaster, because then you're not thinking consciously about longevity and what has transferability and what has all these things. You're just worrying about, I gotta get through this, by hell or high water.
And I think the Marie Kondo tidying up, right, that whole idea, I think the biggest connection between tidying up your life and your home and what we're asking about instruction and what we're doing for kids is that idea of questioning, right? Like you said, you're asking yourself, is this worth it or not? And that idea of intention. You are intentionally choosing what stays and what goes. So I think that's going to be a big, a big theme in going forward is what's necessary to stay and what can get tossed out.
Yeah, and I think people are gonna have a real hard time with that. And I don't know why. Like, I guess, from my perspective, I never fully understood the, there's not enough time in the year
to get it all
mentality.
Okay.
Like that. And that's been, let's be fair, if there's one common thread that happens in teaching, is that there's that statement put in places, there's not enough time. Whether that's collaborative stuff between teachers, whether that's contact time with your students in the classroom, there's always that element like, we don't have enough time. Like, how? I guess I don't get that like mentality, but I understand where it comes from. Like that, here we're giving you this curriculum and these are all the points you have to hit and all the things you have to do, especially when you're in a large district and there's multiple buildings and they're trying to create some sort of continuity between buildings. Like, you need to do all these things, we'd like you to be kind of here at this time and like all that stuff. I get that, because people feel that pressure, I have to do all these things, and it's kind of like an unwritten pressure. When you ask people, administration and higher ups and stuff, they're like, well, we don't put that pressure on you, but it's definitely there.
And it
Teachers
even
feel
from
that.
above them, right? Coming from the state, coming from the nation, and anything we do that's going to be spread across comparatively, it feels like pressure, and it
100%.
feels like you're adding something, and we don't consider taking things away, right? We want to do what's best for our kids, and we think at times that we need more time to do that, or more space to do that.
And I think, at least for us in our experience, I think some of that pressure, there was really good stuff done by our bosses and stuff like that, our building admin and district admin, where they were very blatant to take some of that pressure off.
Sure.
Only worry about this, don't worry about that. Like, that was great.
When we started online learning?
Yes, when we were in the spring, March to June. I think there's going to be a lot of people that, if we are starting the school year in a distance learning setup, there's going to be assumption some of those things are now gone. That it's going to be that normal school year type unspoken pressure that teachers have to do all these things, to be implementing all these things, to be talking about all these things. And the thing that, like teachers always say that, like, all the things that are on your plate of a normal school year is going to be set back down in front of you. But now you're doing it without the, in-class time, which, let's be fair, makes a lot of that easier. When the kids are right out in front of you, it makes a lot of things easier.
For sure.
I think there's a worry about that, but I think there's a way to do that successfully, you know, in a distance learning environment. And it's like you said, being purposeful about those choices that you're making and what you implement in your classroom and the things you do. I think you can be successful.
And so I guess, I open the question up to you of what should be different, how do we get that started? And I think you steered toward instruction, so we kind of started talking about that, but let's take a step back for a second, because we know successfully to build relationships and communities with your kids, it's, even if we were in seats, it's, you take a step back from that instruction and you start with some of that social emotional, community building, identity, figuring out who these little people are. I came across an article that interviewed a woman named Melanie Kitchen, who works in New York. She is a technology integration specialist, so she works with schools to think about how to do some of this online instruction. And she came up with these 9 steps, so really easy read. I shared it with you for you to kind of access some of her points, and I feel like she started out where we all need to start thinking, and it was about that community and thinking about stakeholders, right? Community building with your kids, community building with your parents. I would even offer up, asking admin, counselors, whatever, to kind of join maybe some of your synchronous, Zooms or whatever, and starting to build those relationships. And I think starting the article that way was intentional, because
of course
we need to kind of start that way.
Yeah, and we need to, it really, if you're not, as it is already, teachers start that year, building your classroom community and doing all those things.
But I would question, do you spend more time now?
I think I guess it depends on your comfort level with the technology and what you're doing, because I can see people that use a tremendous amount of technology in their classroom already. They're building technology communities and environments and things. I think if you have a comfort level there with some of the tech, maybe your time's less, but for really anybody else, you really have to weigh into that probably a little bit slower and methodical and purposeful than maybe other things, only because I think, especially with us being, secondary teachers, kids are used to classroom environments a little bit more by the time they get to us. But maybe not this technology environment and way that looks. And realistically, I think the teachers that have maybe a better plan for themselves rolling into the fall, good, bad, or indifferent, if you have a plan you're looking to execute, you probably will end up spending less time.
Sure.
If you don't really have a plan how you're gonna socialize with your kids, how the kids are gonna socialize with each other and work together in this digital environment, if you don't have that plan moving forward, you're gonna end up probably spending more time building that community, or have to revisit it more often during the school year.
But I do think, plan or not, I think maybe part of this is permission. Giving ourselves the permission to hold off on curriculum and 100%. Hold off on instruction. So whether or not, you are tech savvy, whether or not you do have some sort of plan of how you want to meet your kids and get to know them on whatever platform, it's giving ourselves that permission to say, if it's 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks. If it's 3 weeks, it's 3. Just to say, I'm going to prioritize creating this community and building, like you said, building competencies where they are in a very different environment. And while they know how to function in school, they're meeting new people. These kids are coming through middle school, or coming from 5th grade to middle school, and it's put the time in to what you want your expectations on Zoom to be. Put the time in to working through your learning management system or whatever, and I think permission's the key word there, just allowing yourself to take the time.
And I think when you were talking about bringing other people involved into it, you know, the idea of education and schooling is that, you know, everybody's gone through it. So they all have a pretty generic example of what classrooms look like and
Yeah.
what a teacher is and what students are and principals and whatever, the whole 9 yards. We have to do, and when I say we, it's that big we of teachers, admin, counselors, the whole school identity, have to do a better job of bringing parents and guardians into that world as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we already, as teachers, make some pretty big assumptions that parents know how things work in a classroom. And I think a lot of times when you sit down with parents and start talking about the ins and outs and stuff, they're a little surprised. And not in a bad way, but like, oh, when I was in school, it was this, and this, and you're doing all these great things and whatever.
Yeah.
But now, like, you have to you have to assume there's no knowledge.
Right.
And
It's different for everybody.
It's different for everybody, and I think that was one of the biggest missteps we had, and I had personally rolling into ending this last year, was I did not do enough reach out with parents.
I agree.
And be very specific, going, this is what we're doing day in and day out. These are the expectations I have on the kids. I expect them to do, you know, X, Y, and Z. Here's how I'm gonna support them in those learning goals.
Yeah.
Here's how you can support them in these learning goals.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you contact me. This is how the kids can contact me the best. 'Cause one of the things I picked up, and I don't know if it was from that article you sent me, or if it was something else I found out, I'll link it later. As simple as showing the kids and parents how a kid can ask a question. Literally how to replace the raising of a hand in this environment.
Sure.
Because I think that was one of the biggest things where I think kids would either wait till they got screen time with you, or they would only send questions through messages and email. Like, you know, they're having that pathway of, here are the ways you can ask something that's like a instant question.
Sure.
Because I would have kids that would not ask them stuff, or only ask parents because they didn't think it was an important enough question to send a message. So like really being purposeful, going like, this is how we're replacing you raising your hand, which could be, you know, in a classroom. That's a million reasons why a kid does that. But how do you replace that? And do parents know that? And do parents understand how the system is going to work in your classroom, in your building, in the school district? And I really think, you know, that was a big miss in a lot of cases.
Myself included. I feel like you said, the outreach wasn't there, and I want to do a much better job with that, with caregivers and thinking of like everybody working together, because the kids will be at home, so we need to be able to count on siblings and aunts and uncles.
And in this case, in
parents.
an at-home situation where it's quite likely parents are completely back at work.
Sure.
I think at least I saw a huge fall off of student interaction when when businesses reopened and parents were back to work, only because new responsibility fell on those kids.
Yeah.
They were young enough or in a setup where older siblings were watching over them, so like there wasn't that same type of
motivation or
expectation, right? It was just be out of my way type stuff.
Yeah.
Or the kids themselves were the ones in charge, and they had younger siblings and other things to worry about, or they were at a family member's house that don't have kids, or don't have the same understanding of what's happening. And we need to do a better job of, those are all the people we have to have part of this conversation.
Right,
it's not as simple as sending parents and guardians a form letter, this is what's going on. It's a bigger conversation, because you are literally changing an educational scope. And that's a huge conversation, and it can't be done in an email or successions of emails. It's big, it's huge.
And I think one of the things that came up, again in that article and in multiple times, this idea of being multimodal. And I was like, oh, I love this. Like this idea of, we think about it all the time, giving kids multiple ways to, have learning styles, or giving directions in multiple ways. Like, keep that in mind in this digital setup. So while it's sharing things with caregivers, or instructions for tasks, or sending messages to kids, or trying to build that community, allowing for synchronous and asynchronous recording, putting things in print, having things as updates or messages, or like you said, emails or images or posters or newsletters, just like saying things in 3 different ways.
Yes, 100%, because I think what ends up happening, especially, we talked about earlier, people, their comfort level in the technology, like how many times you saw just this kind of failing because it was an element of like, well, I posted it on updates.
Right.
Why didn't you see it?
Right.
Well, I don't know, because there's a million updates, and every kid's getting a million updates from their 6, 7, 8 teachers.
Yeah.
Plus everything else it's flying at them. It's easily missed. It's like it's like asking someone, "Hey, did you see this tweet by this person 2 days ago?"
It's
There's so much other things, like you're gonna miss stuff. So what was that term?
Multimodal.
Multimodal.
Right? And just different types of modes. So how sharing your information in 3 different ways. And again, it's just being conscious of those different setups. And like you said, whether it's comfort with tech, or time, or access, right? I think we just need to be sensitive to not everyone, and this is something I struggled with, during a couple months. Not everyone has our same situation.
Sure.
Getting out of your own perspective and realizing that other setups are different.
And I truly think, I know moving forward there is that element, having our, like that structure of a plan already introduced, of being more, there's a few more expectations on us, like of trying to be similar.
Yeah.
Right? To for ease of use for parents and kids.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's something where, building admin could really help in that situation, just seeing what does our building look like? Or anybody. I mean, it just a non-teacher, how about that? Like whether that's a parent, like building admin, counselors, support staff, a non-classroom teacher going in and looking at a student's schedule on their, learning platform and going, does any of this make sense? Can I go into this cold on any given day and go, I know exactly what they need to do today?
Yeah.
Without any experience necessarily on the platform, but being able to look at directions with maybe like a 1-sheet guide. When you log in, here's where you can look for every class for the stuff they need to do today.
Yeah.
And by an outside source, does that look good?
Yeah.
Does it
like
look simple?
Like a accountability check, or like a maintenance.
Because I think when we talked about that, we real quick didn't even think about just how it looks to us versus a kid.
Yeah.
How does it look?
Different devices.
Yeah. Like a laptop versus an iPad versus a phone.
Yeah. I think just being cognizant of differences.
But it's one of those things it's so fresh, it's so new that you're not thinking. You're in Mayday mode.
Yeah.
You are in scramble mode trying to figure it out, but now's the time we have to start thinking about those things, because now it's not get me to the end, this will do for now.
Yeah.
This is your education.
Yeah. Right. This is for real.
This is for real. And I think I'm hoping there's that level of importance for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, you can't take days off on this. You can't say this is good enough because it's technology and I'm not comfortable, and I know at some point we'll be back in the classroom, and that's when I'll work that magic to get everybody back on board.
Right.
Like, it can't be that. It has to be taken as like, this is your first week of school. You can't screw this up.
Right. So then moving forward in progression, right? You put some time in to community building, we don't, you're covering a lot of these bases, you're thinking intentionally about like your needs and essential skills and what's gonna take the kids from like each content area or whatever grade to grade. And then we know, and we have expectations of this from our district, of synchronous learning, right? Doing these live, whether it's Zoom, whatever platform, to have these. Of course, you'll probably have some recorded mini lessons or things very synchronous that like kids can pace, and all of that's awesome, right? They can look at it on their own time and come back to it or whatever. You do that in seat instruction anyway, right? That's not a new concept, but some of the synchronous stuff, and again, there's some discomfort into doing this live instruction through a computer, and it's weird, and the muting and the, right, it's all new and different. Something that was brought up in that article is like using that time for active, like most bang for your buck instruction. Like not necessarily like keep the asynchronous and the synchronous separate, right? The asynchronous might be, like I said, a mini lesson, very like teacher directed, giving tips and tricks or whatever, but that in that synchronous teaching, being okay with working small groups, being okay with maybe not all 30 kids being there at the same time. And again, I think it's some of that permission stuff. Like, I love that idea of running a small group and saying for, these 30 minutes, you 5 are it. And we're gonna like work through this, this, and this. I'm gonna answer questions. I'm gonna like confer. I'm gonna really hit whatever the skills are hard with you, and then other kids will get their time in other ways. Or even that's some of that potential for doing some project-based stuff and doing some shared screen and like digging into some research, having them use technology in ways that are not necessarily like tech as a tool, but tech in a realistic way. What do we use technology for, right? Kind of questioning that idea. I look stuff up. I research things that I'm interested in. I read a lot online versus on paper. Like, how can we set them up for some of these like realistic technology things? Maybe do that during that synchronous time.
I think the biggest thing is understanding, and I'm looking at it very from the math point of view, right? And how often in math, the teacher just becomes this wealth of knowledge, right? Basically, like this kind of human textbook of like, I'm going to show you how to do this stuff, and I'm going to show you how to do it so it's simpler for you, or make sense of it, or why it's important. Like, you do all those things. It happens so often where when you talked about like, I already do some of this asynchronous, right? Like understanding and going through the nuance of your curriculum and going, what is just a resource I need to make available to the kids? Do I need to be there in person and go, this is how you find the area of polygons? Or can I make that something as a reference for them to look up later? And then the bang for my buck time is creating something or building something or doing something that shows that importance of this topic and why we do it. Which I think when you get down to it is the exact, that should already be happening ideally.
Like
that should be
person versus
that
what
stuff
they access as resources.
Like that stuff should be already in classrooms. Like it should already be, that time in class should be those great conversations and those great teamwork activities and those great like projects that develop this great understanding. And if you spend that time, what I fear is if you already spend that time in the classroom just giving kids info that could be done in an asynchronous way, I feel like that's what your online world's going to be too.
Not necessarily like looking at it differently, but just utilizing the camera as like that.
It's just a window, and it's like this, where yes, we're talking to each other, but there's this window that goes elsewhere. We're not really engaging with that, right? We're not saying something and waiting for that response. We're like, I'm going to lecture you, and here's the practices you have to do to reinforce this lecture, and then I'll see you guys next time. And unfortunately, I think college online courses have been that for forever. And
Well, I like how you said, that, like, that time is make that time important, make that time sacred when you're doing some of that synchronous learning, or synchronous instruction. And I think part of that is like make it worth their time.
Yep.
Like what you're doing with, so like have that active engagement, have that independent practice with you being there to give feedback and to give support, right? You're facilitating some things rather than, like you said, just disseminating information. Use those recorded videos at asynchronous time to, like I said, build an anchor chart or you know, give those tips or that information that's just like definitions or whatever, some of the tools, because we want those tools to be accessible again, and then use that Zoom time to make them more active and engaged, and utilizing that chat tool, or you know, there's going to be all different ways to do it, and I am not well versed in it yet at all, but just I think just keeping in mind the word active and keeping in mind making it worth their while.
Of course.
If we're going to ask them to be here at a certain time,
sure, yes.
Let's
and
use that time really beneficially.
Counting absences in
Exactly.
some kind of way, like
Exactly.
you gotta sell it. You gotta be here, because it can't be, you know, well, you have to be here.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be enough.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be enough. Makes me think of two things. One, could this be, you know, a moment of change where we really think about, we move out of an era where schooling is this like separate thing, and then the rules of school and how you use information is different than the real world. I know that's a big thing in math. You know, you can't use a calculator on these topics. You can't look it up like this on these topics. You gotta be able to know it and do it on this test I gave you.
Yeah.
Like, is this an opportunity, since we are working in this digital platform for many of us, that we reshape how we have kids find information, utilize information, and show their knowledge of it, because it's no longer an ability for me to give you a question that you can Google, or like Snapchat filter for math problems, right? Like, that exists. That technology is real. That's something I could never have thought about when I was in high school in the early 2000s, that we were going to have something I could hold a camera phone up to,
Right.
and it would scan it
Solve
and do the problem
equations,
for me, let alone a camera phone.
Yeah.
Can we get past some of that stuff where I feel like that's such a school thing? You got to be able to do this without the aid of these devices that are so just everywhere.
Yeah.
And
embrace them.
And
Like,
embrace
bring
them and change the game on what the stuff we're learning is.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be a curriculum change, but like a complete different way of how we approach it and why we use it and what we do with it. Because right now it still feels like I'm teaching you these basics and we extend them, and this is how they work in the real world, but there's like these unspoken rules of like, I don't pull a calculator out until Christmas, or you know, all that junk.
I think part of it, a mindset shift could be assume they're going to use it.
Boom.
Assume they're going to use the tool, the technology, the shortcut, the whatever, because again, that's the world we live in. One of my biggest things, you know, that comes up, speaking from like the reading and language arts perspective, is not using Wikipedia as a resource. I use it all the time. Would I use it in an academic paper if I was in like a graduate level course? Potentially not, but I might gain information from it to then take me to other resources or take me to other places. So I think it becomes explaining to the students how to use the tool. How to use the resource, how to use the things, and like what's the difference between Wikipedia and an article, like a journal article, or what's the difference between using a calculator to solve this and then using, you know, some sort of like teacher trick. Well, you're not getting the meaning behind the equation or the problem or whatever, but like assume that's where they're gonna go first, and then try to either like navigate and guide them through those tools, because if we're going to be the people that know better, like help them get through those like I said, navigate through those resources, and and talk about purpose, talk about time and place of like when they work, or elevate their thinking to go beyond it. So if they're going to use a calculator anyway, well then get some explanation behind their process.
And I think that's the huge challenge with teachers. We're at a time now where what has been good for so long has been absolutely destroyed by simple technology advances.
Yeah.
And it makes we have to level up, like what we even learned in college, preparing to be teachers is almost like it's gone.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. What I learned on how to be a math teacher is almost gone.
Yeah.
Like
it goes fast.
It goes fast.
Like that turnover goes fast.
But I think a lot of teachers today, regardless of what era you learn,
for sure,
you're teaching.
It's the nature of the beast, right?
The second thing I hope for a big change in is how we approach students, in terms of just communicating help. Right? I think so often we, as teachers, are able to say, let me know if you need help. Raise your hand, ask a question if you need help. You need to learn how to advocate for yourself. You need to, right?
Yeah.
And that, of course, changes through grade levels, how we confront kids needing help and advocating for themselves.
Sure.
As a first grader is a lot different than as a
Yeah.
11th grader.
Yeah.
But that idea, in this environment, or in the normal school environment, you know the kids that are less likely to ask for help, and you can scaffold some of that stuff because they're right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can be at your table because I know you're not going to ask me a question, and we can work through some of that scaffolding on how to do that.
You can be closer than 6 feet.
Right, you can do all those things. How do you do that in an environment that's distant?
Yeah.
So quick, those kids and more kids. There's gonna be more kids uncomfortable asking questions and doing stuff. They're gonna fade to the background.
Yeah.
And real quick going, message me if you have any problems. Is all the kids that you're gonna get the kids that are gonna message you because they message you.
Yeah.
Creating lanes, and we talked about it a little bit before when I talked about how do you replace the hand in the air, and making that very obvious to all the stakeholders involved.
How do you help?
How do you create lanes as a teacher for you to go to them? Because I think that is going to be a huge change for teachers. You have to go to the students more. And we saw that a little bit when, a lot was taken off the plate of special ed teachers, other support staff, because you have to go to those students.
Yeah.
You have to make that reach out, and you need to do it this often, and you need to do these things. How can we as a classroom teacher reach out to every kid in the classroom? I think you touched on that with being okay with, working with small groups at a time. You have this time frame.
More intensity.
Yep.
In smaller pockets.
Yep. And moving the needle that way instead of having 30 faces on a screen in front of you and going, okay, here, I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah.
Let me know if you have any
But
questions.
yeah, I think being okay with timing your day and being okay with not having all 30 faces looking at you at the same time, or all 30 faces being, unmuted. Be okay with creating pockets and breakout rooms where some kids get more time dedicated and that can happen in seats as well, right?
Yeah.
When you think about conferring and you think about strategic small groups, again, it's that permission thing of fair isn't necessarily equal, right? Like there's going to be different equity for different kids based on different needs.
And I think that's going to be a huge thing. And I hope, moving forward, I think we have a decent structure underway for if we start in a distant learning thing. And I hope, my hope is as a building, we do some summer planning or pre-planning to understand the students we have and have a game plan as a building. How you reach out as a teacher, how you can reach out to parents and guardians as a teacher, how counselors are supporting that idea, how admin's supporting that idea, or all the different. We have so many resources.
Yeah.
How to use it's different now. You know how to use them in a building. we don't know how to use them now.
Yeah.
Having that plan in place to really get rolling, because when you're in the thick of it, it's going to take so much more mental energy to work in this environment because it's new. You're going to forget about those things.
Absolutely.
They're not going to be the tools. They're going to be the kitchen. It's not going to be the kitchen tool that's sitting on the counter you use all the time anymore. It's going to be the kitchen tool that's in the back cupboard that you have to get the step stool out because we have to be ready for that.
So I think what you're saying is really starting to bridge the community, a school community, and all hands on deck. I mean,
everybody's
we
involved.
cannot do this on our own. So I think there's more to this conversation.
100%.
Right? I think there's a possibility of like a hybrid scenario that we could break down. I think there's the idea of potentially being in seats, but considering not going back to normal, not looking at it as, we're in seats, made it. This is what I was hoping for.
Yeah, even if we're in seats, we're not out of the shadow.
Right. Nor is the world ever going to go back to what it was. We cannot go back to a normalized society where, there wasn't a global pandemic and that safety's not considered, that there's not racial inequity in education, and we can't, there's too much that's happened to go back to normal.
It's not hypothetical that one day the schools are open and then next day they're closed till further notice.
Yeah.
Right? That's not hypothetical anymore.
Right.
It's real.
That's where we are.
So yeah, there's a lot more to talk about.
So let's cut this off and we can come back and kind of consider some other scenarios or other ways that, we might attack